All right, we're going to begin. Tonight is a very important topic. Perhaps it is one of the most important topics of the series that challenges the struggles and the trials of the 21st century. It's about the immorality explosion. It is the greatest challenge of our time because people have lost the sense of knowing the difference between right and wrong. And as a result of that, we're living at a time with tremendous depravity. Depravity meaning that their conduct, the conduct of a lot of people, is in opposition to God's plan, to God's divine plan, to what He intended the world to be like. There has always been depravity, there has always been lawlessness in the past, but unfortunately today, with billions of people and with mass communication, it is extremely damaging, much more damaging than in the past. It's so prominent that children, young innocent children, are being swept by it unknowingly, innocently, naively. And I can't believe it myself. I mean, I'm not so old, but I recall better times. I recall 40 years ago a different kind of a world that I was growing up, regardless of the country you were living in, and I've been in various places. I don't remember the level of talk, of cheap talk, whether it's in the news, in the media, the way it is today. The jargon that's used, the vulgarity that is used, the way people dress in the street. In general, the way people relate to each other. There's just so many things have changed, even in 20 years. But I'm going back to 40 years because it's so obvious. When you go back more years in time, I'm sure many of you who are older perhaps remember what it was like in school 50 years ago, 60 years ago. The relationship not only between parents and children, but between the students and their teachers. I mean, these are obvious things. I don't think anybody will argue about this. There are many, many studies that have been done, and I don't think too much came out of the studies, because all the studies do is point out what the problems are. In order to tackle these issues, in order to make life normal, what we believe should be normal, takes a tremendous amount of effort involving the government, not only the parents. So much got out of hand that it does not appear to be like things are going to be getting any better. Before we go on to explain the situation, it's important that we understand what immorality is. What exactly is immorality? Immorality comes from the word moralis. Morality in itself, the word or morals or morality, is principles concerning distinguishing between right and wrong. So immorality would imply the violation of those morals, the violation of moralitas, as it's called in Latin, or good behavior. Lawlessness is also implied. What's lawlessness? There's a certain innate desire for the human being to be free. He doesn't like to respect authority. If it were up to him, he would not want to have any authority. Liberalism is also a concept that we come across these days, much more than in the past. There were always people who were liberal, and liberal in itself does not connote anything negative per se. It just means that people want to be a little bit more liberal and not have too much government on them. So it depends how far you take liberalism. The better word for liberalism is, or the better word for the negative type of liberalism is libertine. A libertine attitude or behavior is a disregard for morality. It's not just that one wants to be free from restraint, it's a total disregard. He doesn't believe that there should be any morality. What's interesting, if you look at world history, is that Judaism, pretty much as a religion, introduced a lot of morals. and ethics in the book called the Torah, the Bible. And much of its values has been adapted. They've been adapted by Christianity and by other faiths. They make some sense. They're pretty logical. And especially if you believe that they are divine, then of course we respect them as well. Once you believe, however, that they are divine, then they should be permanent, intended for all times. Once a person moves away from the idea that these morals are divine, and he says they're man-made, that leaves room for people to say, well, they don't apply anymore. We gotta adapt to the times. Instead of us adapting to those laws, we are unfortunately adapting the laws or changing them. Many groups, even within Judaism, have attempted to do that, to change those laws. And how could they justify making changes? Because they're not divine according to them. So once you move away from a divine origin of those important values that have been adapted by many people, then of course that opens the door to making very big changes. And sometimes those changes will fly in opposition, completely contrary to what the original law was. So Judaism introduced many important morals, and especially in the area of relationships, relationship between husband and wife. For many generations, it is obvious if you read world history that the civilizations that existed then and before were not so moral. I mean, they made up their own rules. People always have had rules to maintain some degree of law and order. But if you read the description of what the Torah forbids the Jew from engaging in, certain illicit relationships, the Torah says, and don't do or don't copy the ways and the behaviors and the practices of the nations around you. It is already telling us, and we know this from history ourselves, even without reading the Torah, that that's what the other nations, the other cultures and civilizations were involved in. In pretty much anything goes. Without divine guidance, we're opening the door to something called idol worshiping. Now, why do I say idol worshiping? Today, supposedly, we don't have idols. But if we understand how idol worshiping comes about, we will see that it really is still in existence today. A good way to define the need to worship idols is as follows. Formulation of beliefs that cater to one's needs. I think that's a good definition. In other words, one wants to worship a certain idol, one wants to believe in something that really is not necessarily proven. It's really not necessarily something that he believes, but he wants to believe it. He wants to believe something, he wants to have a belief in some idol, or he wants to worship that idol, because it is based or is formulated on his personal needs. It caters to him. It therefore is easy for him. It's comfortable for him. He has no problem with it. On a deeper level, however, I've always explained that the desire of the human being to worship a higher power is intrinsic in his soul. In other words, he wants to. He realizes that there's something higher and more supreme than him, that he needs to turn to the God. He needs to turn to the supreme power for his sustenance, for rain, and for whatever it may be, on a deeper level. But how he interprets that relationship with God, I mean, that of course has had many facets throughout our history, where people have come up with all kinds of ideas of what this God is, or what this deity is, or what he wants from us, or what we should do and how we should behave. Without a clear set of rules, divine rules from God, people are going to make up all sorts of ideas, are going to come up with all sorts of philosophies. And the human mind is pretty creative. You can think up of all kinds of things. So as I've said in other lectures, there was a need at one time for God to present us with a manual of instructions, whether it was the Torah for the Jews or was the 7 Noahide laws for the non-Jews. Something at least basic, of what is permissible and what's not. However, even without a Torah, even without a detailed Torah, the human soul is divine. It has a divine spark in it. And you can look at it as a chip, a computer chip, that God embedded in it the conscience. Conscience. What is the conscience? The conscience means that the human being on his own, if he were to be honest and fair and a good person, if he were to think, he would be able to, on a basic level, know right from wrong. On a basic level, certain things. He may not know everything. He may not be able to decide everything. After all, the human being is somewhat biased to himself, to what is good for him. So he may not always be an objective judge. And that is why I say if he's fair and he's honest, he may be able to know certain things on his own. How? Through his divine soul. The divine soul has a conscience. One is able to know on his own without being taught. Certain things are right and certain things are wrong. They're not acceptable. And pretty much the whole world follows those basics, pretty much. At least it's on paper. They may not practice it. Many of them violate it, right? Nonetheless, they agree in principle that certain things make sense. Why do they make sense? Because the soul understands them on a certain level. But again, if we leave it to man, man is changeable. Man has changed. Governments have changed. Policy has changed. Philosophies have changed. So what was forbidden once, what was acceptable once, is not necessarily acceptable today. You have, for example, hedonism. Hedonism is another philosophy. Hedonism claims that pleasure is the primary or most important good. Enjoy life. They say you only live once. Right? Eat today because tomorrow you will die. In other words, enjoy it. Life is about pleasure according to them. They've thought about it, these people, these philosophers, and they figured, well, pleasure is something good. It does something good. Pain is something no good. So to them, it's simple. That's it. That's all that there is to life. That which gives you pleasure is good. That which does not give you pleasure is no good. They claim they simplified it, but obviously it is the human mind, the creative human mind, that is misleading him to believe that that's all there is to life. And we know that it's not as simple as that it's all about pleasure versus pain. But I gave you this one example of hedonism, a hedonistic lifestyle that many people follow. They just want to enjoy life. They don't want to be bothered, encumbered by any religious beliefs. If you read a little bit more history, you will find that many of the nations that were corrupt, morally corrupt, did not last too long. They all fell apart. They all disappeared. And there's definitely a connection. According to the Torah, according to the prophecies, there's definitely a connection between a nation that came to power and rose to tremendous heights and achieved a lot. And before you know it, they disappeared from the scene because of immorality. Immorality has been the culprit for the downfall of many empires. Therefore, don't be surprised if in the next few years you will hear of the downfall of nations, perhaps in a different way than in the past. But it will happen because, unfortunately, we're at the peak of immorality. Things have degenerated very quickly, and things have gotten to a point where it cannot go on this way. I'm basing this on past history, basing this on the prophecies, that it's clear that we're about to experience a tremendous earthquake that will shatter the world in a spiritual sense. In other words, that, I mean, there may be physical earthquakes too, but when I talk about an earthquake, I mean that something is going to happen because we believe in God, and He did not only create the world, He's involved. He's aware. And he doesn't let things go on like that forever. Just look at what happened in Pompeii. Today you can see exhibits not only of the people who lived there, but of their lifestyle. A very promiscuous lifestyle. It's all on the walls, it's all in the graffiti. It's all on the paintings and the images that you could see. The people who first discovered it were ashamed to see something like that. They hid it from the public for a while. So we don't want to corrupt the children's minds by letting them see this. This was something acceptable in the past, but it wasn't, supposedly wasn't acceptable now either, even though it's becoming more and more acceptable. At some point people realized that it was wrong. Pompeii, destroyed by a volcano. And other cities too, Sdom ve'Amorah, destroyed. Many places that were destroyed. Why? Well, there's a God in this world. We don't always know the reason. But obviously, if there's a lot of immorality, it cannot be tolerated for long. What is unusual is that this generation of all generations has reached the moon. Man has put his foot down on the moon. Man has been able to reach other planets. Man has been able to achieve so much in science, so much progress, so much advancement. Knowledge has increased tremendously, and every year now, I think there is a doubling of the knowledge. Continuous increase in knowledge. Man knows so much. Nonetheless, despite all that he knows, he hasn't gotten to know himself. There's no progress in human nature. There are so many ills that affect society today that have not been conquered, even though we've conquered diseases. You don't hear about smallpox anymore, for the most part. Yeah? So man has demonstrated tremendous prowess in being able to overcome many, many challenges, many hurdles. But what about himself? Man, who the Torah calls the crown of creation, the most important part of creation, created in the image of God. Many of these human beings are today in the image of animals. Literally. Many of them worse than animals. Before we go on and try to figure out how this has happened and what we can do about it, I want to give you just a few examples of what many researchers have discovered in their research, in their studies, of the various problems that are plaguing society as a whole today. Various problems. One of them is pornography. There was always pornography. There was always an interest in pornography. But we're living at a time of video, internet, TV. So pornography has become much more powerful. Pornography has become much more widespread as a result. I mean, people send emails today of all kinds of content. In this pornography, we look at it as we say in Yiddish, schmutz, filth. But it's not just filth. We don't even realize the damage that it does. The repercussions, the consequences of tolerating it in society is terrible. It's terrible. The one that comes to mind, the one that is so obvious, the area that is very, very affected because of the tolerance of pornography is marriage. It is pornography, at least one of the factors, one of the things that has undermined marriage is pornography. Conjugal relations are not what they used to be. Husband and wives, they're not happy with each other, they're not satisfied anymore. You notice it. There's less emotional attachment between people. They get married, they say that they're married, the man put a ring on his wife's finger, and she may have put a ring on his finger, right? But the emotional attachment is completely lacking. Now this is not by everyone. I'm just talking about by those who have been experiencing or addicted, I should say, to pornography, those who are very into it, it has taken a toll. It definitely does. And the wives notice it, something wrong with the husband. And she begins to, of course, to suspect something. She may not know right away. Many women are disillusioned, upset, angry, all because of pornography. There's other things too. There are other problems, but this one has at least compounded the other problems even more. Pornography is, as the researchers say, a tremendous contributor to infidelity and divorce. Something that we know exists in every society. Unfortunately, it is in high numbers today, much more than 10 years ago even. Just 10 years. Much more than 20, much more than 50 years ago. Divorce. Infidelity. Why? Well, there's obviously a lot of immorality going on. And one of those types of immorality is pornography. Because people are watching all kinds of movies, reading pornographic material, it is also making them more promiscuous. People today who are into it have more of a tolerance for this. They accept it. To them it's normal. It has become normal. And ultimately, what it does in relationships, if this is what a person has been going through when he was single, or even when he's married, it has desensitized men. And they look at women as objects instead of a real human being. I'm sharing with you a little bit of what the experts, the researchers have found, and they have done many, many studies. Now, I see this as an observer. I can see, but I did not research it, but I detect it. And when I detect it, I'm not sure what the reason is, what the cause is of why people are like that. But this makes sense. This is one factor in contributing towards infidelity, towards a lack of emotional attachment, as we said. It's definitely a main factor in relationships being so weak today and ending up in divorce. Now, let's not just blame the men, and let's not blame the women. We can and we should point out that the government has a lot to do with it. The government, many governments have become more lax and more liberal in their laws, the laws that they enact, amendments to the Constitution, whatever you want to call it. And as a result of all this acceptance or tolerance, obviously, nothing will be enforced, even though at one time it was illegal. Because they say, well, it's free speech. It's the First Amendment, Free speech, they call it. You can write, you can show pictures in a billboard, you can put up almost anything you want. Today, the only thing that is still prohibited by law, as far as I know, in most books and in most countries, is pedophilia, child pornography. Oh, that's taboo. For some reason. That may not be taboo a year from now. You never know. That still is. And somehow, by the way, this was acceptable in Greece and in many cultures. And to some extent, it still is. People look at it differently, have a different value system. But at least in the modern countries, even though there's a lot of modernity, and all that modernity has brought about all kinds of lax values, somehow certain things are still off limits. It doesn't mean it's not done, but it's illegal. But aside from that, there's a tremendous tolerance for what was once understood that is wrong. People were more modest in the way they dressed. You remember women's bathing suits in the 1950s or 60s? It's not the same as today. You wonder what has happened. So governments have a lot to do with it as well. What else has changed? Men and women are living together. living together, they want to try it out. They don't realize that by doing it that way, in such an unholy way, living intimately with it, it's cheapening the whole relationship. Instead of the marriage and the intimacy being something so special, it has become cheap by living together. But of course, they'll come up with excuses to justify why it's okay and why it's not a bad idea, after all. But this is all pretty much in the past 30 years, maybe 40 years. What else do we see today? A greater acceptance or tolerance towards abortion. Euthanasia. Oh, it's okay. Let him die peacefully. You know, let's disconnect the machine, the breathing machine. He's had 60 good years, but he could still have another 20 years. Why not give him a chance? Oh, it's okay. He's in pain. Doctors, of course, don't want to deal with it. The insurance companies don't want to have anything to do with it. Sure, because they're paying for it. You know, I've been asked by people these kinds of questions. You know, the doctors are not encouraging this person from making an operation that may save their life. Because she's old and she may not do well and there's only a 50-50 chance of success. I told the person, go ask somebody that's not associated with that hospital, an outside expert. The hospital doesn't want necessarily that this person should stay alive and be connected to a machine and spend more money on them. You see? So there's a greater tolerance towards abortion, euthanasia, and let's not forget drug liberalization. A lot of people want to legalize drugs. What about misbehaving children? Haven't you heard a parent once say, oh, it's okay if he's yelling and throwing a tantrum. He's only expressing himself. But he's misbehaving, he's attacking, he's abusing. And people don't understand that all of these major problems start with kids when they're still young, with the education in the home. But they're coming up with excuses. Where are these excuses coming from? Tolerance. A certain tolerance towards certain things that are wrong, that used to be very wrong, and today, tolerance. In the name of tolerance, just accept him the way he is, the way he behaves, in what he believes, no matter what he does, or almost whatever he does, as long as he doesn't hurt people. But wait a minute, they're hurting children through this kind of education. Oh, no, no, no. No, you have to be open-minded, to be liberal. So they don't even see, even though they admit that there are problems, they think wrong. They think that by opening it up, by educating kids when they're 10 years old about intimate relationships between men and women, that they're going to make it easier for them. But it has had the opposite effect. Many studies were done. And I don't know really why some psychologists, psychiatrists, and people in the Department of Education are still promoting certain things when they know that this is so unhealthy. My only answer is that they are themselves like that. They believe in it. They tolerate. They want it. So they don't see anything wrong with it, with this kind of behavior, and therefore they want to teach it. They want all the kids to be like them. I mean, otherwise, how do you explain it? So, as a result of all these types of immoral behaviors in society, it's no wonder that there's an increase in crime, in theft, in adultery, a lot of single parents. So much has changed. But this is all, as I said, it's all as a result of not teaching the kids at home right from wrong. That's where it all begins. Besides the schools, it begins at home. Then, of course, we have the modern thinkers. There's a lot of modern thinkers who want to blur the differences between men and women. Men and women have different roles. God created men, God created women. Each one has a special, unique role. But the modern thinkers are saying, no, they should all be the same, equality. Well, I'd like to see men becoming pregnant. You know, what do you mean equality? They're not the same, they're not equal. I mean, they have equal rights, yes, but they're not identical in their abilities. Each one has a unique mission, a different kind of contribution to make to society. But they are blurring, these modern thinkers are blurring the differences. No, there should be no difference whatsoever. So I wasn't surprised after reading all these studies that 1/3 of adults in the United States of America do not believe in morality. Could you believe that? 1/3 of adults. Doesn't come as a surprise. Okay, so now that we've looked at the problem, now that we are somewhat aware of what's going on outside, and it's not surprising, we want to know where it comes from, how it develops, and what we could do about it from a spiritual level. In other words, we've explained the symptoms, but there is always a spiritual root that explains why these things evolve, what it comes from, and it's important for us to understand the root or the source of the problem if we want to try to, I don't want to say battle it, but try to at least help ourselves, help our children deal with it properly. It is important for us to know that the root of all of this began with the first incident in Genesis, in Bereshit. When the Torah relates to us the story of Chava and Adam and the serpent, the Nachash, it's not just telling us a story. What's this story with a serpent trying to incite Chava? I mean, the Torah is a very, very special, important, practical book of history and laws. But this story is very strange. It's different. Since when do serpents talk? Right? And on the very first day of creating man, he rebels against God. So obviously, the intent of the Torah was not just to tell us a little incident. It was because this is the most important, perhaps, message to all of humanity. At the very beginning of creation, God is letting us know, listen, enemy number one is the serpent. Enemy number one is the evil inclination that I've created. The evil inclination is there to incite. That's his job. And he works 24 hours a day, your entire life. He doesn't retire. And his mission, or his job, is to make you go against God. And your job is to not go along with him, but to stay close to God. And what happened over there? He enticed them. They fell for it. And what did that show? It showed the first rebellion against God. Rebellion against authority. The Torah is telling us, you see, this rebellion against the authority of God will be the problem that's going to be around until Mashiach comes, until the end of days. The biggest problem of all, that man will not always comply with divine instructions. Man will not always follow God. He will rebel. He will opt not to listen to God, even though that's the truth. Somehow, he will be misled, and he will oppose even that which is obviously wrong. And part of the problem is not just that he doesn't like authority, that's part of the problem, but the other problem is what Chava said and how she reacted upon seeing the tree. Oh, ta'ava la'inayim. She desired it. She wanted it very, very much. There's a problem with desire. And I spoke a little bit more about desire, we elaborated on it, on the topic of materialism, so I'm not going to go back into it. But briefly, desire definitely is a big challenge. People have desires. People are tempted because of their desires. And as a result of the human being's desires, innate desires, and as a result of him not preferring to follow authority, this explains why they ignored prophets who had a direct line with God, prophets who proved that they were true prophets who predicted the future, who warned the people, this is what will happen if you don't listen. How could you ignore them? The human being can come up with all kinds of excuses, creative excuses, of why not to listen. But that excuse comes from the nature of wanting to rebel or not wanting to accept authority so easily. It doesn't come easy. Now, why doesn't it come easy? Well, obviously God gave us the ability of free will, but the reason why it's not easy is because this evil inclination is a very, very powerful and sharp attorney. What do attorneys do? Many of them, the good attorneys, they're capable of justifying almost anything. They can tell you stories. A good attorney, a sharp attorney, can make up all kinds of stories, far-fetched stories, and convince his client or convince the judge or convince the jury of whatever he wants to convince. So our tradition is very clear about the power and the strategy of this Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. He's very powerful. And he comes up with all kinds of excuses of why something is okay. It's not so bad. Try it out. You'll see nothing's going to happen to you. Right? That's what the Nachash, the serpent, told Chava. And this is all because he does not want man to be submissive to God. To be submissive to a higher authority, therefore, becomes very difficult for the human being. Even if he's convinced it's true. We're talking about religious, I'm not talking about atheists right now. We have another problem. We're going to get to them. Talk about religious people, observant. They know that God exists. And still, I'd rather not now, mañana will take care of it, tomorrow. They push it off. What's this? It's all from the original problem of Chet Adam HaRishon, the primordial sin, where man was a little bit reluctant. Man hesitated. Man was tempted. Why follow? Why accept authority? Be independent. Be a free thinker. And now we come to the atheists. What atheists don't realize is that even if they're very smart and they're logical and they have argument after argument why not to accept God and why it's not provable and why it doesn't make sense, regardless of what angle of attack they use, what they don't realize is that what the rabbis tell us, Kol hagadol mechavero yitzor gadol mimeno. The greater one is, the smarter one is, the greater his evil inclination is. A lot of smart people, very knowledgeable, very logical, remained atheistic, even though they could have easily have seen with all their knowledge that this is true. Nonetheless, they did not. And that is because their evil inclination is much more powerful. They're greater, they're more knowledgeable, so they need a lot more effort of a different kind, and we're going to get to the effort of what needs to be done for them to see that they are wrong, but they need a lot of work. They're so smart that they think they know everything. They think they are right. And they will make arguments with you that are difficult to answer. I mean, everything is possible to answer if you come with the truth. But still, there will be a resistance on their side. Why? Because that Yetzer Hara that is in them, that evil inclination, won't give in so easily with them. In the end of days, now we're in the generation of the end of days, the battle between right and wrong, between holiness and impurity, will be very, very strong. And the rabbis tell us in the Kabbalah that there will only be two camps, not three, not four, not five, two. those who believe in God and those who don't believe in God. Because this will be the final generation where the battle between these two forces, opposite forces, will take place. And because this is the last battle, the forces of evil, of immorality, will increase their power. They will do anything they can to convince more and more people to be immoral, to behave immorally. This is the last generation. Soon the truth is about to come out. And you will have scientists, knowledgeable people, who will act in the same way as people have done in the past who rejected God, to rebel, not to submit. They'll be so knowledgeable. They'll think, well, I can achieve almost anything I want. They're thinking about building an elevator to space right now. The human being is capable of tremendous achievements in the areas of physics, and medicine, and elsewhere. It will be very difficult for them to let go of that submissiveness to a higher authority because of their knowledge. So, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to protect ourselves from this? This will be a big challenge for everyone. And we are in the midst of this. And the rabbis warn us, be careful. If you are living in those days, this is going to be a very, very difficult battle. Just to believe in God, as one rabbi put it, it's like to climb up a wall. The flat surface of a wall. Try climbing up. It will be difficult because there will be a lot of atheism that will try to cool people's faith. So what should we do? The Torah tells us, if you want to understand at the very basic level what God wants of you, the very basic level, forget about 613 commandments now. If you want to just know what is required for you to succeed in life, at the most basic level, what does God ask of you? To fear Him. That's all. Tzaddik b'emunato yichyeh, the prophet says. In the end, in the last generation, the main mitzvah, the main commandment, that will be the most relevant, perhaps, if we can use that word. I don't know if I should use the word relevant, because they're all relevant for the most part, but the one that will make the most difference to the success or lack of success of an individual will be faith in God. I added this additional dimension, the fear of God, but it's pretty much the same. Fear of God is, of course, on a higher level. True fear of God is much higher than just plain belief or faith in God. But still, the idea is the same. What does God ask of us? Just have a relationship with me, believe in me, fear me. Remember that it is to me that you have to turn, not to anyone else. Kohelet, in his book Ecclesiastes, Solomon, says the same thing at the very end of his book. I told you all about the vanities of the world, and I had it all, Solomon says. I had all the vanities. I was the wealthiest. I was the smartest. And take it from me, he says. You know what really matters in life? What really matters is fear God. Observe His commandments, because that's what man is all about. That's what matters. You don't take the wealth with you. All the fortune you've accumulated, you leave behind. So what matters? A good name. He talks about having a good name, a good reputation. Obviously, a good relationship with one's wife. He speaks about that in Proverbs too, in Mishlei. There are certain things that matter. There are certain things that should be priorities. Money is not one of them. Obviously, if you have the money, then use it for charity. But what really counts in the end, and what really matters, what will make a difference of how a person lived his life or not, was whether he had a relationship with God. Did he fear God? That will determine what kind of a life, the quality of life he had. As a result of having a relationship with God, many things change. What will you emphasize and what you will de-emphasize as a result of knowing that this is the most important thing in my life? Now, okay, if this is all God wants, good. Isn't that easy? Fear God. Believe in God. No. That's not so easy. We wish it was. Why is it not easy? It's not only because of the evil inclination. The evil inclination, of course, gives us a hard time. But let's say somebody really believes. So he's beyond that. He's already a believer. What's holding him back from being a strong believer? To the extent that he will not come to sin. He will not transgress. He will behave himself. What's going to hold him back? What's going to keep him in line? Not just belief. Belief is very important. It helps. The verse says very clearly, in order to develop a relationship with God, in order to be close to God, and to do so successfully, what's required is sur merah va'aseh tov. What's aseh tov? Aseh tov means I want to do good. I want to be kind. I want to pray to God. All of that is aseh tov. In other words, sur merah means stay away, back off from doing that which is wrong, from evil, and do good. Do good is something a lot of people want to do. But the problem is you cannot do good successfully unless you first do sur merah. You take away, you remove all the filth, all the evil. If a person wants to have a good relationship with his wife, a good marriage, but he's still going to watch all the pornographic movies at home. He's still going to watch every video and every television show. That's going to ruin it for him. You cannot do both. One will interfere with the other. When the verse tells us, sur merah va'aseh tov, it's because you cannot do aseh tov, you cannot be completely good and do all that is positive if you don't first remove sur merah. You have to remove the ra. And there's a lot of ra, a lot of evil, a lot of bad in people's homes today. In all kinds of ways. Internet that's not monitored for teenagers is a big problem. And even for adults too. They don't filter and they don't restrain themselves and discipline themselves properly, I mean, that's going to ruin, they're going to ruin their life. It's going to contaminate their minds. They don't realize it. It happens gradually. They lose sensitivity, as we said before. So, sur merah, you got to identify the cause of the problem, remove it, and then there's a chance of aseh tov. Aseh tov, obviously, part of aseh tov, part of doing good is having a good relationship with God, being able to pray to Him properly, not rushing through the prayer, not just uttering words that don't make any sense. To be a good person requires first to cleanse ourselves of that which we know will stand in the way. Once, of course, a person is on the right track, he will be able to get close to Hashem. However, what's also necessary is to continuously aspire to get closer. It's not that I got close and I stay there. I'm close. That's it. Close forever. No, no, no. People have gotten close and they've drifted apart. People have become religious and have become not religious. People have ascended to the mountain of God and they've fallen down. Right? As the verse says, who will ascend to the mountain of God? Mi yaleh behar Hashem. Umi yakum bimkom kodsho. It's not only who ascends, who will remain on top of the summit of God. A lot of people ascend the mountain, a lot of people come close, but they don't all stay. Many of them just fall back. They committed themselves and they broke a commitment. They promised and they broke their promise. I'm going to start a diet. They started for a couple of days, they let go of their diet, right? It requires a certain amount of continuity, right? In order to preserve that closeness that we've accomplished, that we've achieved. How are we going to preserve it? So here we have the right attitude, the right approach. We removed all the evil. We want to do good. We have to aspire, continuously aspire to climb the mountain of God, to always have a relationship. You have to want it all the time. You have to think about it. What happens if a person does not aspire on a regular basis is what's happening to a lot of people. If you don't aspire, and this will tell us a world of information as to why people fail in the area of religion, spirituality, and in relationships in general. If one does not have that goal, clearly defined, this is my goal, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to aspire, what's going to happen, the way human nature works is that if there's not a continuous rise, that one is ascending and growing spiritually, there is a decline. You don't stay in the same spot. You can stay 165 pounds for a couple of years, more or less. Weight? Yeah. Some people have a hard time with that, but you can, more or less, give or take a pound. Spirituality doesn't work like that. You're either rising, growing, or falling, descending. You can't stay the same. You're a different person every day, every year. In order to stay on top, you have to continuously rise. You have to continuously go from one level to the next, like going up a ladder. If you don't go up the spiritual ladder, you descend. You can't stay the same. So one who has the aspiration, he aspires, and he goes about it in the right way, he has a chance of growing and coming closer to God. One who does not have that ambition, he will not get too far. Now, okay, so we have the individual who's removed all the evil from his home, all the bad stuff. He aspires, he's trying to do good, he identified his goal. Is he there? Not necessarily. What did we say before? Remember, let's not forget, the evil inclination is a powerful foe. Very, very powerful. It makes it tough. Imagine somebody who has an anger problem, anger management problem, right? I'm going to be good, I'm going to behave myself. More easily said than done. All it takes is something to really anger him, and he loses himself. He forgot that he made a promise not to get angry. So what's going to help somebody like that? So it's important that obviously that person recognize what his goal is, to define it, to have clarity, make sure that he doesn't have anything in his home that is going to interfere with it, of course. He's going to invest in quality time with his family, with his wife. There's going to be a better communication. They're going to take walks together. All of that, he's doing all the right things. However, here comes something of a surprise. This Yetzer Hara is so powerful that if one does not escape him with tremendous extra powers, he will always be there. In order to understand what I mean by escape, think of a rocket. A rocket is sent up to space. How does the rocket defy the laws of gravity? Anything that goes up must come down. To escape gravity of Earth, you need something called escape velocity. It was the shuttle. The rocket must be traveling at a certain speed, over 23,000 miles or so, give or take, depending from where it is launched, I believe, in order to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth. And after that, once it has momentum in space, it can continue even with less speed. Once it gets out of the pull of the gravity of the Earth. There's a gravitational pull, if we may borrow this term. In the Yetzer Hara pulls, very, very powerful pull. So we need an escape. We need a tremendous, powerful escape to escape the Yetzer Hara. How are we going to escape him? When we spoke about materialism, I mentioned various ideas on how to overcome and how to control oneself in the area of excesses, materialism. One of them is controlling one's appetite, physical appetite, especially in food, in the area of food. We said before that in the incident of the Nachash and Adam and Chava, what stood out was not only an open rebellion to authority, but also desire. Desire also stood out. And desire is something natural, so it's difficult for us to completely suppress. We need to eat, we need to sleep. But it's possible for us to control. It's possible for us to discipline. One area that needs to be dealt with properly, in other words, properly disciplined, that will help us overcome this evil inclination, where we become the masters and not the servant, is in the area of food. If one is able to control his appetites, his desires, discipline himself, this is what will give him more power than the Yetzer Hara. Otherwise, with that powerful Yetzer Hara there all the time, and a person trying to do everything right, he can still fall. He can be tempted. Desire is very powerful. So that the desire in the area of food can be easily disciplined to the point where we become the masters and not the slave. What happens after we are able to get away from the Yetzer Hara? What happens to after we become masters instead of slaves? Something very, very beautiful happens. When one gains control of himself and he's in charge, the midah of busha will be restored to him. Shame. What does it say by Adam v'Chava after God speaks to them? What happened? Did you eat from that fruit? What does it say? They were ashamed of their nakedness. Shame. When a person has a certain clarity, right? When he, even though in that case they succumbed to the evil inclination, nonetheless, they had this degree or this level of shame in them, which they did not have before. Not before, they were so pure that it didn't bother them that they were naked. They were so pure, but that was because they were so pure. Today you have people who have lost their shame, and that is why they're not bothered by their nakedness. It's just the opposite. I don't want you to get confused. Over there it was because of their purity. They were truly ashamed of themselves. They realized their mistake. It was completely transparent to them. Today, everything is so blurred. There's no shame. People don't think that there's anything wrong going around naked in some places of the world. What happened? They've lost shame. And the rabbis tell us that that's exactly one of the things that you will notice in the end of days. If you're living in that generation, you will see that the son has no shame for his father. Wow. And you know what? 30 years ago, I didn't see it. 30, 40 years ago, most children, they had a certain level of respect for their parents and teachers. There were always children who misbehaved, but today a total lack of shame. The chutzpah that you have today, the insolence, the audacity, is terrible. What's that? No shame. The shame is gone. Why? Why is the shame gone? Well, there are no restraints. There's no aspiration to get close to God. You can enjoy all kinds of foods and all kinds of physical comforts that did not exist in the past with ease. So everything is accessible, the physical comforts, right? That has caused the removal or the blurring of shame. People don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. As we said before, there's a certain tolerance level of certain things. If there would be shame, they wouldn't tolerate it. It's a contradiction. Once a person is able to restore that shame as a result of him having the upper hand in this battle with the Yetzer Hara, then he's more or less safe. Because shame prevents people from sin. A lot of people do not sin because of the shame, especially in public. They don't want to be caught. Some people don't care because they don't have shame. But once you restore shame, then you've put a tremendous amount of distance between this individual and sin. Shame alone. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret. Once an individual has restored the shame to himself, he's somewhat in control of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. He aspires to do the right things. He doesn't want to get into trouble. He has removed any trouble or anything that can lead to trouble from his home. There's a secret ingredient, and this secret ingredient is a keresh pizza. It's a springboard to be able to grow spiritually and to be able to deal with almost any challenge that lies out there. In other words, including atheism. One of the biggest challenges in this generation, besides materialism and all this immorality, is atheism, but people just don't believe. The following ingredient, the following midah, will go a long way. Rabbis tell us as follows. don't forget that the most important thing that one has to accomplish in life, as far as dealing with certain struggles and certain difficulties, is the work on his midot. Okay? Work on one's character. Character refinement is the ultimate thing that every human being has to work on. There's no exception to that. Obviously, we have to have a good relationship. Obviously, we get married, we have children, we observe the Torah and mitzvot. There's a lot of things that we accomplish, there's a lot of things that we want to get done. But rabbis remind us that you've come down to this world basically to accomplish this. So, as you go along and as you go through life and you work and you have children and so forth, don't forget this. You need to refine your character. People have different characteristics that they need to refine. And this is not easy. Of all the characteristics, however, there's a secret to one characteristic being the most important one of all. And if you get a hold of this characteristic, I want to say you have it made, but I'd rather not risk saying that because who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of challenges all the time. But this one will help a lot of us. No matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, it will help them get on the right track and hopefully stay away from trouble. It's called Midat HaEmet. Truth. Speaking the truth. If an individual can get himself to always say the truth, never lie, always speak the truth, no matter what, this will help him a great deal. And I'm going to explain why in a moment. But let me read to you the verse in Psalms, in Tehillim. מזמור לדוד, אדוני מי יגור באוהליך, מי ישכון בהר קודשך, הולך תמים ופועל צדק ודובר אמת בלבבו. In English, a psalm by David, Hashem, who may sojourn in your tent? In other words, who will be with you? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? One who walks in perfect innocence and does what is right and speaks the truth from his heart. Chapter 15 in Tehillim. Speaks the truth from his heart. Apparently, this is something significant. Yeah. And I can go on with many, many examples and stories that prove this point. But here, all we need to know is that this particular midah, of all the midot, besides disciplining your desire, of course, in the areas of food and appetites, midat haemet will be the one that will make a big difference. People who want to become balei teshuvah, who want to return to their roots, who want to become better people, who want to lead a normal life. And they've had trouble with the law, not only with the law of God, but with the law down here below. Regardless of what crime they've committed, if they really want to make sure they don't regress, speak the truth. Speak the truth, and that will go a long way to preserving whatever it is that we've accomplished. If we want to continue to strive for becoming better people, not only do we need to remove, of course, that which is causing the trouble, but to stick to a certain discipline in life and to get used to speaking the truth. Now, I say speaking the truth. When I say speaking the truth, I just don't mean always saying the truth and always admitting one's faults and so forth. Speaking the truth has also something to do with proper use of the tongue, of the mouth. The rabbis tell us, besides speaking the truth, be careful not to contaminate your mouth with vulgarity. Right? Whether it's slander or whether it's all kinds of bad words. Do you know how today the words that they use in the media and in the newspaper are terrible? I can't even imagine how they allow themselves to write such explicit bad words. This was not even thought of years ago. So contaminating the tongue, the mouth, by saying things that are not proper, of course, will contradict the other part of the mouth that's trying to say the truth. So when I say the truth, it's not just using your mouth in the proper way of always speaking the truth, but also not misusing it by saying words that are vulgar. Obscenities, I think it's called in English, or groserías in Spanish. Bad words. Another thing that we can do that will be very, very helpful, as I said earlier, is that everything has to begin at home. So the education of one's children has to be of prime importance to us, where we send them to school, even if it costs money, even if it's expensive, a private school, a good school. Who are the friends of your child? A good example in the home. And there's something that, of course, the Kabbalah discusses at length, and we don't have too much time to go through it, but I'll just mention it briefly. You know, sometimes parents ask, what happened to my child? You know, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? You know, we did everything right. A lot has to do with the husband and wife during the time that they're intimate. That they are holy, that they are clean in their thoughts. They're not thinking about somebody else, that they are focused on the right things. For the union to be a good union, that it has to be done in the proper way, and there are rules on how to do it properly. According to the Kabbalah, this produces gentle children because they have pure souls. They still have, of course, the potential of committing wrong, but at least their edifice, in other words, they come down into this world, their edifice is holy, is clean because their parents were clean. So what kind of children a person will have is obviously dependent on many things. The traits of family, of relatives is also a factor. Their surroundings, the atmosphere, the environment. But very important what goes on in the home. Parents are an example for their kids, how the parents are between each other, not only once the children are growing up, but even before, when they're conceived, how they related to each other, how they behaved then, what did they think of. All of that makes a difference on the type of child that comes down to this world. And the rabbis tell us very clearly, a lot of the rebellious kids, rebellious adults later on, are as a result of their parents not having done the right thing, not having behaved properly. So who's to blame, again, for all of this? Well, we blame the government, we blame pornography, there's a lot of things to blame. But where does this all begin? A good place to begin is husband and wife doing the right thing when they're together, and later on when they're raising their children. Having a good relationship with their kids. Having a good relationship with each other, husband and wife. Modesty is another area that has to be guarded. Tzniut. If a woman is not modest and she dresses provocatively, not only does she cause other men problem, if this is the kind of house that she's raising her children, what kind of an example does it set? Yeah, look at mom, look at the way she dresses. It's okay for her daughter to dress like that. And one thing leads to another. We're talking about purity of the mind. We're talking about holiness. All of this makes a big difference on how the child will turn out. And that is why the Torah tells us, be careful, be careful that in your home, in your midst, there should not be anything immodest. Otherwise, God will turn away from this home. God wants to reside with us, but if we turn him away because there's something immodest in the home, obviously he won't want to be in such a home. All right, I just want to finish up with an important idea that is found in astrophysics. And this is something for atheists to think about, to ponder about. It's called the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle says as follows. It's a philosophical consideration that observations of the physical universe must be compatible with the conscious and sapient life that observe it. What this basically says in simple words is that it appears to us from the way the world is, the way the universe is, that it came about in such a way that it not only enables life, everything is so perfect, that it actually enables life, but it also enables us, the observer, to see it and to appreciate it. It wouldn't make sense for everything to come about without somebody being able to relate and observe it. And even though this philosophy is a lot more expansive than what I just said, The main idea behind it, which I think is true, is that God made a world where we can see Him. God made a world that if we take the moment and think, we can come up with the truth. We can observe the truth. We may not know everything there is to know, obviously, because we're limited. But take a moment to think about how this world came about, how it enables, because of the way it is formed, that it allows life. For if something was missing, it would not be possible. It has to be that for all of this to have come together in such a way, it is for someone like ourselves to be able to observe and appreciate and see it the way it is. That there's obviously God, a God who's responsible for this. This is as opposed to the Copernican principle that says that humans don't occupy a privileged position in the universe. Imagine. Humans don't occupy a privileged position in the universe. Oh, we're just human beings. There's universe, there's galaxies, there's everything else. And the human being is not special. No. Look at everything and ponder everything, and you will see that you are special. The human being is unique, right? And hopefully more and more people will understand this, but in order to reach that conclusion, obviously people have to think. And today they're not thinking. They're too busy with all the vanities of life. And obviously, even though to us it is obvious, to many people it is not. There was an atheist who was once asked a very good question, and I liked his answer too. So you're an atheist, you don't believe, you're a scientist. Okay, what are you going to say and what's your reaction going to be when you go upstairs and you see God? What are you going to say? So you know what he said? And I think that this tells us a lot about what is going on in the human mind, in the human heart. I'm going to ask God, why didn't He make Himself more obvious? You know what this tells me? As soon as I heard that, I said, yes, that's a very, very true statement. But he doesn't realize it. That's exactly the point. God does not want everything to be obvious. He conceals Himself because it is our job to discover Him. That's what's escaping the minds, the brightest minds. They don't understand. They don't try to understand the why. God created the world. They try to figure out the how. How did it come about? Was it a Big Bang? Or was it evolution? Forget how. Ask yourself why. What am I doing here? Does this have purpose? And the answer is, if you look around and begin to think, and of course, get away from all the junk that contaminates society, and you're truthful and honest, then you have a chance that, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, you will discover that there's a creator to this world. Amen.